Welcome, everyone, to the Digital Dose. I'm really excited for today's conversation. I'm joined by Hank Levine, founder and chairman of Additive Corporation. Hank spent nearly 18 years building one of the world's largest global RPO companies, scaling to close to 1,000 recruiters across India and the Philippines. Now, Be Additive, he's operating in over 43 countries and building an AI powered talent marketplace from scratch. On top of that, he's an MIT Sloan graduate who's created marketing and business strategies for six companies, four of which were acquired for a combined 92 million. Hank, welcome to the Digital Dose.
Thank you, Zelja. Thrilled to be on your podcast.
Absolutely. Well, Hank, your company was literally born from a concept you called coinophobia, the fear of being ordinary. That's not something, you hear every day from a founder. When did that ideal crystallize for you, and how does that actually shape from the decisions you make and be additive today from day to day?
Well, this is kind of a funny story. So, on my very first time I was ever on an airplane, I was 9 years old. And of course, I was pretty amazed at being up the sky and looking at the clouds. But we were flying over farmland. And I saw all these little farms. And I was just thinking about the people, that these are probably very nice people. They have nice families. They probably love their families. But I just had this thought, if they died, it really wouldn't make a difference. It would make a difference to their family, but they wouldn't really have changed the world. And that just got me thinking about how I wanted my life to have consequence and to just touch a lot of people. And I told a lot of people about it. In my last company, actually, someone said, there's a word for that. It's coinophobia. And I looked it up and I said, yeah, that's what it is. So I've always been really inspired to build something big that could improve a lot of people's lives. That's really the genesis of the name Be Additive. It's all about adding value.
Absolutely. Well, you and Cash Sampat built a massive RPO operation before this, so close to 1,000 recruiters globally. You said that Be Additive, you're doing it better. What specifically are you doing differently this time around, and what lessons from the first company were you most intentional about not repeating?
Well, it's really a reorienting of the company. So prior to my last company, I was in a succession of venture capital backed software companies. I had some pretty good exits from those companies, and I was really eager to get back into software development. So Be Additive, we do have a staffing firm. We do have what's known as KPO, or Knowledge Process Outsourcing Firm, which has subsidiaries in India and Philippines. And that company, we build teams for companies in the US and Europe. So those could be teams of software developers, teams of people in marketing, back office, recruiters. But what I really wanted to do is get back into software. And so we are building an AI talent marketplace, which is addressing the very big problem that funded AI startups have, hiring senior AI talent. So I'm sure you've read about the almost unimaginable amounts of money that these AI startups are raising. It's so much, it's hard to get your head around it. But along with raising that money comes enormous pressure to produce. And their investors and their VCs are, they write the check, they want to see product really fast. It's not so hard to hire junior talent, but at the senior levels, there's just way more demand and there's supply of that talent. And also, that talent makes salaries that are almost unimaginable, plus equity and so forth. And even when companies can find the talent and offer them huge compensation, they oftentimes don't accept because they want to work for big tech, which they see is even more prestigious and closer to the money on their options and so forth. So they have a big problem. They can't get building without this senior talent. Meanwhile, I have been working in all these countries for the last 20 years, and I know that there's great senior talent in those countries. A lot of people with PhDs, but they're working for local companies. And when you work with local companies, your exposure is much more limited. It's in the AI world, the action is really happening in the US and China, and especially in Silicon Valley. So the people working in these local companies, they would prefer to work for one of the AI startups in the US. First, they can get a nice pay bump, maybe 30, 40%. But what they really want is the prestige and the resume building that you get in working globally. So, our marketplace, the companies post their job orders, they get matched with AI and with a lot of human touch with recruiters. We have vetted talent from around the world in the marketplace. And we can usually fill these positions in 2 to 3 weeks. For the companies, they not only get excellent talent that works remotely offshore, but this talent is typically about a third to half the price of hiring someone in Silicon Valley.
Wow. Interesting. You recently launched the AI talent marketplace at Additive Tech. You've mentioned in the interviews that the ideas came from placing a few AI professionals and realizing you could, product size because you had both software companies and the offshore entities. Walk us through what that product actually looks like today and where you see it in 12 months.
Well, okay, so where this idea came to mind for me was in my previous company. During COVID, there were some marketplace for hiring nurses, particularly traveling nurses, that just exploded. Literally going from no revenue, brand new product, to over $1 billion revenue in 3 years. And we were supplying talent to some of those marketplaces, but we were making barely any money.
Mhm.
So I saw the power of this market of the marketplaces, and I also recognized that for the last 3 years or so, staffing industry has been, what I would call a recession. There's been uh, the total revenue for the industry for the last 3 years, every year has gone down. And but there's always pockets that are growing. And the big pocket that's growing is senior AI talent. So I kind of took the concept of the nurse marketplace and this area where there's great need, and that's why we're building the marketplace for that niche. So we're very, very focused on funded AI startups. That's what we call our beachhead, and we're building everything to address their specific needs. And our goal for this year is to be broadly known as the company for funded AI startups to work with, and then we will branch out into other verticals.
Makes sense. You've been pretty direct about AI's impact on recruiting itself. You've said that the next 2 years will be especially difficult for recruiters because AI will reduce headcount before it creates new roles to replace them. How do you navigate that tension as someone who employs recruiters while simultaneously building AI recruiter tools?
Well, I think we're in a very fortunate position being a pretty new company with very, very experienced recruiters. These tools basically allow our recruiters to do a lot more with less. So instead of hiring more people, they're just being more productive. If you had a big recruiting company and you had AI, AI doesn't replace jobs, it replaces tasks. But there are a lot of time consuming tasks that recruiters do that are redundant and pretty routine. And as AI does that, you actually need fewer recruiters to do the same amount of work. So if you're an established company, you might have to have layoffs. If you're newer like we are, we just don't add as quickly. So that's nicer. I do think, the recruiting industry and a lot of knowledge industries are likely to see some cutback in jobs initially, but AI is also going to be a great innovation engine, and it's going to open up new markets for recruiting firms to go after and other companies to go after. So I actually, I like to look at this historically. If you look historically, and there's been huge technology disruptions, there's always been a period of efficiency followed by a period of innovation. So let's go way back when we were mostly an agricultural company, and all of a sudden, agriculture started getting automated, and there was less need for as many agricultural workers, and people were panicking. What was the country going to do? This was the basis of our economy. But out of that emerged innovation, where we became a manufacturing economy, and the manufacturing jobs actually paid. There were more of them, and they paid a lot better than the agricultural jobs. Then, same thing happened to manufacturing, where there's a lot of technology disruption, and initially, factory workers lost jobs, but they were replaced by service level jobs. And these service level jobs, there were more of them, and they paid better. Now we see the service level jobs, some of them being replaced by AI, and it's scary. But AI is also going to produce great innovation. I see things that amaze me, like vibe coding. So you're probably familiar with vibe coding.
Mhm.
And, with generative AI is great at creating language. So you can give a command and it'll write paragraphs for you in English or French or any language. But the easiest language for it to write is code, because code is much more structured than spoken languages. And so you get a tool like Cursor and combine it with Claude, and you can do vibe coding where you basically just talk to your computer. And as you talk, you see the code being written on your screen. It's amazing to watch. And uh, our software development team at Beyond Tech is incredibly just 4 people. I've done a lot of software development. I'm telling you, an equivalent development 15 years ago would have had a team of 20 people, and it would have taken longer. So when it's so easy to write code, you can imagine there's going to be a lot of companies formed from that. The
Mhm.
question is, are these companies going to be big companies making a lot of money with few employees? Or are they going to be big companies with a lot of employees? I don't think anyone knows the answer to that.
Be Additive operates across 43 plus countries with legal entities in the US, India, and the Philippines, and employee of record services spanning the rest. What's been most surprising or challenging about building a truly global recruiting operation at this scale?
Um, I've been doing it for a pretty long time. Right? I've been doing it for 20 years. I think I've made every mistake in the book. And, but, the biggest mistake is working with bad vendors,
Mhm.
and sometimes you can't tell because they're good at sales. And but if you work with them over many years, you get rid of the bad ones and you hold on to the good ones. So we have a lot of trusted, well-known employers of records that we work with, and I'm glad those mistakes are in my past.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Or on your site, you talk about the difference between be additive versus extractive. That's your impact is that your impact is cumulative through each action. For a company in the staffing industry, which honestly has a reputation for being transactional, how do you operationalize that philosophy across your teams in 3 countries?
Well, I think there's few industries in the whole world that can be more additive than staffing and recruiting, because when you get people's jobs, you profoundly change their life. You not only allow them to support their family, but particularly in countries like the United States, people's identity are so tied up in their jobs. They have more confidence, they just feel better, they're happier, they're healthier. So I do think that staffing and recruiting is a very additive profession. However, there are companies, they're often called things like body shops that just want to get a placement whether or not the person's a good fit or not. We are very intentional in not doing that. We make sure we understand our clients. Even with our marketplace, we have a account manager assigned to every account. The account manager knows the client inside out. We help them on all their job orders. So there's a lot of white glove treatment. On the talent side, we vet everybody who gets in our marketplace. We do match job orders with vetted talent, but a lot of times they're not a perfect fit. So we also have very experienced recruiters who will find more people and make sure we bring in a perfect fit. So if you really understand client needs, if you really understand your candidate needs, you are doing a great service for people.
Absolutely. You've been vocal on LinkedIn about open source AI models, global and equitable, and reshoring manufacturing through automation. You estimated that that could unlock up to 30 trillion in GDP over the next decade. How does additive position itself in that larger economic shift?
We're going to pay very, very close attention to that. I think I might have mentioned that staffing doesn't create markets. Staffing follows markets. And one of the things I tell everyone in AI is you have a it's just a mandate. If you're running a company, these business cycles are going to be way more compressed. There's going to be few industries that are going to be robust industries for 20 years or 10 or 5. They're going to be like 1 or 2 year cycles. So you need to look how that plays out. I don't think that reshoring or robotics is going to happen overnight. I think anything that is a mechanical process, like a robot, goes much more slowly than software innovation, like you see in AI. I also don't think that all these robotic innovations are going to happen in the U.S. So we're just paying real close attention to it. Where are the niches we can go after? What countries are they in? And we follow that.
At this stage of your career, what does success look like for Be Additive that isn't just about revenue?
Well, my goal and my personal goal is that in 2026, we will create a beachhead where funded AI startups go to our talent marketplace first to find their talent. Once we create that beachhead, we can expand into other industry verticals. I do want to have a dominant platform, not so much to create wealth for myself, but uh, to create a lot of good jobs for a lot of people. And if I do make money out of this, I really will probably just give it almost all away.
That is that's intriguing. Well, Hank, thank you so much for sharing your insights. This was incredibly valuable. I really appreciate your time and your openness. Thanks again.
Thank you, Zelsi.